The Florida humidity usually smells of salt air, but on this August night, it was thick with the metallic tang of blood. When the first deputy stepped into the driveway, the flashlight beam revealed a scene that defied every law of nature. A young man, muscular, barely clothed, was hunched over a motionless body. He wasn't just attacking, he was tearing at the victim's face with his teeth, snarling through a mouthful of human flesh. It took 4 officers and a K-9 to pry this golden boy away from a meal he claimed was something else entirely. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot, thank you. To the neighbors in Jupiter, Florida, Austin Harrouff was the living embodiment of the suburban dream. Born on December 21, 1996, in Palm Beach Gardens, he grew up in a world of manicured lawns and professional success. His father, Wade, was a prominent local dentist, a man often described as boisterous and hardworking, while his mother, Mina, was the nurturing core of the family home. For years, the Harrouff household appeared stable, anchored by the expectations of high achievement that come with a comfortable middle-class upbringing. Austin and his younger sister, Haley, were close, navigating a childhood that seemed, by all accounts, unremarkable in its normalcy. However, the quiet facade began to show its first hairline fractures when Austin was 13, as his parents navigated a divorce that split his world in two. Despite the separation, Austin remained high-achieving, enrolling at Suncoast Community High School, a prestigious magnet school known for its rigorous academic standards. He wasn't just a face in the crowd, he was a 3.3 GPA student who found his footing through the raw physicality of high school sports. Initially a shy and reserved freshman, he transformed himself through the wrestling team and the football field, using the weight room to carve out a new, more confident identity. By his senior year, he had traded his adolescent insecurity for a muscular frame and a social circle that saw him as a golden boy, the kind of kid destined for a bright future in medicine or sports science. That path led him to Florida State University in Tallahassee, where he initially declared a major in biology. He joined the Alpha Delta Phi fraternity, fully immersing himself in the quintessential American college experience: tailgates, frat parties, and the pressure to maintain a certain alpha persona. But beneath the surface of the gym selfies and the 3.3 college GPA, a darker, more complex transformation was taking root. By the end of his freshman year, the social buzz of the frat house began to sour. Austin grew bored with the drinking culture, and his focus shifted from social climbing to an almost pathological obsession with his own physiology. He changed his major to exercise science and began a crusade for purity. His YouTube channel, once a place for standard bodybuilding advice under the handle _Harrouff, began to host videos that felt increasingly untethered from reality. In these clips, he would often stare into the camera with an intensity that unsettled viewers, discussing his decision to stop bodybuilding because he no longer wanted to follow the crowd. He spoke about his internal struggles and a growing desire for some vague, higher state of being. His family noticed he was becoming increasingly withdrawn, his moods swinging between deep, unreachable depressions and bursts of manic energy that his father would later recognize as symptoms of bipolar disorder. As the summer of 2016 rolled around, the decline accelerated into a freefall. The young man who once worried about his bench press was now preoccupied with ancient religions and demonic hallucinations. He began researching Krishna, Buddhism, and the life of Jesus, convinced that he was developing special abilities that set him apart from the human race. His paranoia grew so thick that he could no longer sleep at night, fearing that something was coming for him in the darkness. He told those close to him that he felt invincible, a grandiosity that masked a terrifying fracture in his psyche. Perhaps the most chilling sign of his impending break was his burgeoning belief in clinical lycanthropy. Austin began to tell people that he felt half man and half dog, a delusion that took a physical form when he insisted on wearing a Michael Vick jersey. To Austin, the garment wasn't just sports apparel. He believed it allowed him to channel dog spirits that gave him strength. His mother, Mina, watched in horror as her son's behavior grew more erratic by the hour. At one point, he was found in her kitchen, manically drinking vegetable oil, his eyes vacant and his mind seemingly miles away from the Jupiter suburbs he called home. He was discarding his drugs and his supplements in a desperate bid for purity, unaware that the very mind he was trying to cleanse was already beginning to consume itself. While the storm of Austin Harrouff's psyche was gathering force a few miles away, the world on Kokomo Lane remained bathed in the slow, rhythmic comfort of a South Florida evening. This was the domain of 59-year-old John Stevens III and his 53-year-old wife, Michelle Mishcon, two people who had spent decades weaving themselves into the very fabric of the Jupiter and Tequesta community. To know them was to understand a specific kind of local hospitality, one that didn't require an invitation or a formal occasion. They were the anchors of their neighborhood, a couple whose presence felt as permanent and reliable as the tides of the Loxahatchee River nearby. Michelle was a woman of vibrant energy, a force of nature who carried the legacy of her father, Jeff Mishcon, a former mayor of North Miami Beach. She had inherited his public spirit and a deep-seated belief in the importance of community, though she chose to exercise it through personal connection rather than political office. Friends often remarked that her laugh could be heard from several houses away, a boisterous, infectious sound that signaled everything was right in the world. She worked in the finance department of a local company, but her true vocation was the life she shared with John. She was the planner, the one who ensured the fridge was always stocked and that every neighbor felt seen. John, 14 years her senior, was her perfect counterbalance. A retired businessman with a penchant for the simple pleasures of the Florida lifestyle, he was often described as the quintessential gentleman of the coast. He was a man of the water, happiest when the sun was on his back and a fishing line was in the water. He took immense pride in his daughter, Ivy, and the life he had built after years of professional grit. John didn't need to be the loudest person in the room because his quiet confidence and easy smile did the work for him. He possessed a protective streak that was never overbearing, just a steady, calm assurance that he was there for those he loved. Together, they had created something legendary in their quiet cul-de-sac, the garage bar. It wasn't a business, and it certainly wasn't a secret. It was simply their open garage, transformed into a communal living room for the entire street. They had outfitted the space with comfortable couches, a large television, and a stocked refrigerator, turning a utilitarian storage area into the heart of Kokomo Lane. On any given night, the garage door would be rolled up, revealing the warm glow of the TV and the silhouette of the couple sitting together, usually with their beloved dog, Fisher, resting at their feet. The garage bar was a sanctuary for the neighborhood. It was the place where people stopped during their evening walks to discuss the news, complain about the heat, or celebrate a local sports win. John and Michelle didn't just tolerate these interruptions, they lived for them. They created a space where the barriers between neighbors dissolved. There was no need to knock. If the light was on and the door was up, the bar was open. The air in that garage often smelled of salt spray, citronella candles, and the faint, sweet scent of the nearby tropical foliage. It was a sensory anchor for everyone on the block, a symbol of safety in a world that often felt increasingly isolated. The couple's relationship was a testament to enduring partnership. They were frequently seen together, whether they were taking their boat out for a sunset cruise or simply running errands around town. Neighbors observed that they seemed to have found a rare rhythm, a way of moving through life that was synchronized and devoid of the friction that wore down other marriages. They were that couple, the ones younger pairs looked to as a model of how to grow older without losing the spark of genuine friendship. In the weeks leading up to that August night, the atmosphere at the garage bar had been as lively as ever. Michelle had been busy with her work and her social circles, always the first to offer a hand or a kind word to someone in distress. John had been enjoying his retirement, maintaining the house and the boat with the meticulous care of a man who appreciated what he had earned. They were content. They were settled. They were completely unaware that the very openness they cherished, the open garage door that signaled their love for their neighbors, would soon become the gateway for an unimaginable horror. The tragedy of John and Michelle lies not just in their deaths, but in the vibrant, generous lives that were interrupted. They represented the best of suburban life, the belief that your neighbor is your friend and that your home is a place of peace. On Kokomo Lane, The garage bar wasn't just a place to get a drink. It was a testament to the idea that a community is built one conversation at a time, one open door at a time. As the sun began to set on August 15th, 2016, the ice was in the cooler, the TV was tuned to the evening news, and the couple sat in their usual spots, enjoying the cooling air of the Florida twilight, blissfully ignorant that the golden boy from a few miles away was already wandering into the darkness, shedding his humanity with every step he took toward their driveway. The heat on August 15th, 2016 was a physical weight, the kind of heavy, saturated air that clings to the skin and makes every movement feel like a struggle against the atmosphere itself. In Jupiter, Florida, the summer nights rarely offer a reprieve, and for Austin Harrouff, the temperature seemed to mirror the rising pressure inside his skull. That evening began with a semblance of domestic routine, a family dinner at Duffy's Sports Grill. Austin sat with his father, Wade, and his sister, but the young man who occupied the chair was not the son Wade remembered. He was agitated, his eyes darting across the room, his body vibrating with a manic energy that made the mundane setting of a sports bar feel dangerously volatile. The friction started almost immediately. Austin's behavior was erratic, punctuated by strange outbursts and a disturbing fixation on the speed of the service. At one point, he reportedly became so frustrated with the wait for his food that he attempted to eat a bowl of salad dressing, or, according to some accounts, tried to ingest a piece of plastic. The transition from a college athlete to a person losing their grip on consensus reality was happening in real time, right across the table from his family. When Wade tried to intervene, attempting to calm his son, or perhaps just demanding a return to social decorum, the snapping point finally arrived. Austin didn't just argue, he erupted. He stood up, pushed back from the table, and walked out of the restaurant into the humid twilight, leaving his family sitting in the stunned silence of the dining room. His father, gripped by a growing sense of dread, followed him out, but Austin was already moving with a purposeful, frantic gait. He wasn't just walking, he was fleeing from a reality he could no longer navigate. For a brief window of time, Austin's movements were tracked by his family and the digital trail of a panicked mother. He made his way to his mother Mina's house, located a few miles away. It was there that the purity obsession took a truly grotesque turn. Mina found her son in the kitchen, his eyes vacant, manically drinking vegetable oil from a bottle. He was searching for a way to coat his insides, to cleanse, or perhaps to lubricate a transition he felt was occurring within his very DNA. When his mother tried to stop him, he pushed past her, heading back out into the night. The walk from his mother's house toward what would become the crime scene covered roughly 3.5 miles. During this trek, the transformation from Austin Harrouff, the FSU student, to something predatory began to solidify. The Florida night was thick with the sounds of insects and the distant hum of traffic on the turnpike, but Austin's internal landscape was filled with the voices of gods and the growls of animals. He began to discard the trappings of his human identity. He tore off his shirt, the Michael Vick jersey he believed held spiritual power, and eventually his shorts, wandering through the manicured suburbs of Jupiter in nothing but his underwear and a Make America Great Again hat he had picked up along the way. As he walked, his mind was a kaleidoscope of delusions. He later told investigators that he felt like he was being chased by shadow people, dark entities that were nipping at his heels and demanding a sacrifice. He believed he was a superhuman, a being of ancient power who was finally shedding the weak skin of his suburban upbringing. Every shadow cast by a palm tree, every flicker of a street lamp, was interpreted as a sign or a threat. He was no longer navigating a neighborhood. He was traversing a mythological battlefield where he was both the hero and the monster. The path eventually led him to Kokomo Lane, a quiet cul-de-sac where the houses were spaced comfortably apart and the sense of security was absolute. It was roughly 9:15 p.m. The street was dark, save for the warm, inviting glow emanating from the garage of house number 603. This was the garage bar of John Stevens and Michelle Mishkon. The garage door was up, a beacon of hospitality in the darkness. Inside, the couple was doing exactly what they always did, sitting on their couch, watching television, and enjoying the evening air. To Austin, this scene wasn't a domestic idyll. it was a target. The open door represented a breach in the world, an entrance into a space where he could finally confront the darkness he felt chasing him. He turned into the driveway, his feet slapping against the concrete. He wasn't running yet, but his posture was hunched, his movements predatory. He didn't say a word as he crossed the threshold of the garage. The transition from the quiet hum of the television to the sounds of a life-and-death struggle was instantaneous. Michelle Mishkan was the first to see him. She likely didn't even have time to stand before the figure in the red hat was upon her. The violence was not a clean, clinical act. It was a chaotic, visceral explosion of rage. Austin utilized whatever was at hand, his own fists, his teeth, and a pocket knife he had been carrying. The initial assault on Michelle was fast and brutal. John Stevens, seeing his wife under attack, did exactly what his neighbors knew he would do. He fought back with everything he had. He stepped between the intruder and his wife, a 59-year-old man trying to fend off a 19-year-old athlete who was currently experiencing a surge of manic strength that made him feel invincible. Outside, the neighborhood remained quiet for a few more seconds. A cricket chirped in the bushes. A car door slammed 3 houses down. And then, the silence of Kokomo Lane was shattered by a scream so high and so full of terror that it cut through the walls of the surrounding homes. It was a sound that didn't belong in a Jupiter suburb, a primal cry of help that signaled the arrival of something ancient and terrible. A neighbor, Jeff Fisher, heard the commotion and didn't hesitate. He ran toward the Stevens home, thinking perhaps a domestic accident had occurred or a burglar had been caught. As he approached the garage, he saw a scene that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. He saw a young man hunched over John Stevens, a figure that seemed more like a wild animal than a person. When Fisher tried to intervene, Austin didn't flee. He turned on Fisher with a snarl, lunging at him with a knife and a ferocity that forced the neighbor to retreat, bleeding from his own wounds. Fisher scrambled back to his house, his hands shaking as he dialed 911, telling the dispatcher that there was a zombie, or a madman, killing his neighbors. Inside the garage, the struggle continued. Austin was no longer using just the knife. He was using his body as a weapon, his mind fully submerged in the delusion that he was an animal. He began to bite and tear at John Stevens, who was now motionless on the floor. There was no logic to the attack, no motive of robbery or revenge. It was the raw, unadulterated expression of a psyche that had finally, irrevocably fractured. The golden boy was gone, and in his place sat a figure in a red hat, covered in the blood of 2 people who had done nothing more than leave their garage door open on a humid Monday night. The first sirens were a scream of sanity trying to reclaim a street that had descended into the prehistoric. Jeff Fisher, clutching a jagged, bleeding wound on his face where Austin had lunged at him, was still on the line with dispatch. His voice was a frantic staccato, a mix of disbelief and pure, unadulterated terror, as he tried to explain that the figure in the driveway wasn't just a killer. He told the dispatcher that the attacker was currently hunched over John Stevens, and he was biting him. When Deputy Kimberly Binns pulled her cruiser onto the lawn of 603 Kokomo Lane, the scene bathed in her headlights was a tableau of absolute madness. The air was thick with the smell of copper and the rhythmic, guttural sounds of a predator at work. There, in the middle of the driveway, was the 19-year-old Austin Harrouff. He was shirtless, his muscular frame glistening with sweat and a dark, slick coating of blood. He was positioned on top of John Stevens, his fingers dug deep into the older man's shoulders, and his head was down. He wasn't just attacking, he was systematically tearing at Stevens' face with his teeth, oblivious to the world around him. The deputy didn't hesitate. She drew her taser, the red laser dot dancing across Austin's back before she pulled the trigger. The click, click, click of the electrical current echoed through the night as the probes found their mark. But the expected collapse never happened. Austin didn't scream, he didn't even flinch. The 50,000 volts of electricity seemed to do nothing but irritate him, causing him to emit a low, vibrating growl that sounded more like a large dog than a human being. He remained locked onto his victim, his jaw clamped shut with a strength that suggested his muscles were being fueled by something far more potent than adrenaline. By the time backup arrived, the situation had spiraled into a tactical nightmare. 2 more deputies joined the struggle, grabbing Austin's arms and legs, but he possessed a frightening, superhuman strength. He tossed his body back and forth, dragging the officers across the pavement as they fought to break his grip. Every time they managed to pull him a few inches away, he would lunge back, snapping his teeth and trying to resume the meal he had started. The officers later remarked that his skin felt strangely cold to the touch, despite the oppressive Florida heat, and his eyes were rolled back, showing nothing but a terrifying milky white. Desperate to save the man on the ground, the deputies released a canine named Sato. The dog, trained to take down the most violent of suspects, sank its teeth into Austin's arm, shaking him with a force that should have ended any resistance. Yet, Austin barely reacted to the dog. He didn't cry out in pain. He simply continued his animalistic focus on John Stevens. It took a combined effort, multiple taser deployments, a canine bite, and 4 grown men physically prying his fingers open, to finally roll the teenager onto his back and secure the first set of handcuffs. Even as he was being subdued, the horror didn't stop. As they pulled him away, Austin began to spit out chunks of human flesh. He stared at the officers with a vacant, chilling intensity, his mouth a crimson mask of gore. As they loaded him into the back of a patrol car, he reportedly looked at one of the deputies and began to moan, telling them to help him, because he had eaten something bad. When they asked what he had consumed, his answer was direct and devoid of emotion. He told them he had eaten humans. He told them he had eaten his last meal. While one team of officers struggled with Austin, others moved into the garage to attend to the victims. The silence inside was a heavy, suffocating blanket. They found Michelle Mishcon first. She was lying near the back of the garage, her life taken in a flurry of violence so intense it had left the room unrecognizable. The garage bar, once a symbol of community and light, was now a hollow, blood-stained shell. John Stevens lay in the driveway, the extent of his injuries so severe that the veteran deputies, men who had seen years of Florida's most brutal crimes, had to look away. Austin's behavior continued to fluctuate between animalistic rage and a disturbing, childlike state of confusion. He began to growl again, making nipping motions with his teeth at anyone who came near the cruiser. He told the paramedics that they could shoot him now because he deserved to die. He spoke about special powers and the dark, his speech slurring as his body began to shut down from the physical toll of the struggle and whatever internal process was ravaging his organs. The transport to St. Mary's Medical Center was done under heavy guard. Austin was vomiting up the remains of his victims, his throat and esophagus already beginning to burn from a substance investigators hadn't yet identified. The neighborhood of Kokomo Lane, usually a sanctuary of quiet retirement, was now a brightly lit crime scene. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, cordoning off the garage bar forever. The palm trees stood as silent witnesses to the moment the suburban dream was devoured by a nightmare that had no name, no motive, and no mercy. The sirens had barely faded into the humid night before the cameras began to arrive, turning the quiet suburban streets of Jupiter into a stage for a global spectacle. As images of a blood-masked college student began to circulate, the world's collective imagination seized on a single, terrifying explanation: synthetic drugs. The term flakka became a household word overnight, a shorthand for a specific kind of chemical madness that allegedly turned humans into flesh-eating monsters. Media outlets from London to Tokyo fixated on the zombie frat boy narrative, fueled by the visceral horror of the crime and Florida's reputation as a testing ground for the latest and most dangerous designer stimulants. Detectives from the Martin County Sheriff's Office were initially inclined to agree with the public's assessment. The raw, superhuman strength Austin had exhibited, the ability to ignore taser shocks, the resistance to a canine's bite, and the sheer animalistic focus on his victims, aligned perfectly with the known effects of alpha-PVP or bath salts. These drugs were notorious for causing excited delirium, a state of hyper-arousal where the body's temperature skyrockets and the mind enters a loop of violent paranoia. The working theory was simple. Austin Harrouff had taken something, and that something had stripped away every layer of his humanity. However, the medical reality inside St. Mary's Medical Center was complicating this narrative. Austin wasn't just under arrest, he was dying. Within hours of his arrival, his internal organs began to fail. His liver and kidneys were shutting down, and his esophagus was severely burned, as if he had swallowed a caustic liquid. This led investigators back to the scene at Kokomo Lane, where they discovered several open containers of household chemicals in the Stevens garage, solvents and weed killers that Austin had apparently ingested during or after the attack. It wasn't clear if he had drunk them in a final act of self-destruction, or if, in his delusional state, he believed they were part of the purity he so desperately sought. Because of the complexity of the case and the potential for rare synthetic compounds, the local toxicology labs were deemed insufficient. The FBI was called in, and samples of Austin's blood were sent to a specialized facility in Virginia. For weeks, the investigation hung in a state of suspended animation. The families of John Stevens and Michelle Mishcon waited for a chemical smoking gun that would provide a motive for the inexplicable. They wanted to believe that a drug was responsible because the alternative, that a human mind could do this on its own, was far more difficult to process. When the toxicology report finally returned, it hit the sheriff's office like a physical blow. The results were clean. There was no flakka. There were no bath salts. There was only a trace amount of THC from marijuana and a minimal, non-intoxicating level of alcohol. Austin Harrouff had committed a double homicide and an act of cannibalism while essentially sober. The zombie narrative collapsed, replaced by a much darker forensic reality. The monster wasn't a chemical. It was a clinical, catastrophic break from reality. Detectives pivoted their focus to Austin's digital and personal life, searching for the origins of this madness. They spent hundreds of hours combing through his computer, his phone, and a series of journals he had kept in the months leading up to the attack. What they found was a roadmap of a mind disintegrating in real time. The journals were a chaotic mix of fitness goals, philosophical ramblings, and terrifying admissions. He wrote about hearing voices that told him he was a god, an entity of ancient power who didn't belong in the modern world. He described a growing fear that he was becoming something else, something half human and half animal. One of the most chilling discoveries was his YouTube channel. In his final videos, the charismatic student athlete had been replaced by a man staring into the lens with hollowed-out eyes, speaking in riddles about balance and purity. He had become obsessed with the idea of being a protector, while simultaneously expressing a deep-seated fear of the very people around him. There were searches on his computer for how to tell if you're going crazy and hallucinations, suggesting that Austin was aware of the rot inside his mind, but was too deep in the delusion to seek conventional help. The psychiatric evaluations that followed were equally disturbing. Multiple experts, including those hired by the prosecution, began to form a consensus. Austin wasn't just angry. He was suffering from a severe form of schizoaffective disorder and clinical lycanthropy, a rare psychiatric syndrome where a person believes they can transform into an animal. The doctors noted that his behavior on Kokomo Lane, the growling, the biting, the lack of response to pain, were textbook symptoms of a brain that had completely disconnected from human social norms. The prosecution tried to push back, pointing to the argument Austin had with his father at Duffy's Sports Grill as a traditional motive of rage. They argued that he was a spoiled young man who had simply snapped after being embarrassed by his parents. They focused on the fact that he had carried a pocket knife, suggesting premeditation. But the sheer bizarreness of the crime scene and the total lack of a logical goal made the rage theory difficult to maintain. Why would a man seeking revenge stop to eat the face of a stranger? Why would he drink garden chemicals until his throat burned? As the investigation drew to a close, the community of Jupiter was left in a state of permanent unease. The flakka myth had provided a comfortable shield, a way to blame a suburban tragedy on an urban drug epidemic. Without it, the residents were forced to confront a more unsettling truth. They looked at their own children, their own high-achieving golden boys, and wondered what might be lurking behind a 3.3 GPA and a gym-sculpted physique. The investigation had solved the how and the what, but the why remained a jagged, open wound that no forensic report could ever truly close. The legal battle dragged on for 6 years. a grueling marathon of psychiatric evaluations and procedural delays that tested the patience of a grieving community. In November 2022, the case finally reached its climax in a Martin County courtroom. However, there was no jury to weigh the evidence. Both the prosecution and the defense agreed to a bench trial, ultimately conceding to a startling conclusion. Austin Harrouff was legally insane at the time of the murders. Circuit Judge Sherwood Bauer accepted the plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, a verdict that sent a wave of silent, painful fury through the gallery where the Mishcon and Stevens families sat. Instead of a prison cell, Austin was sentenced to indefinite commitment in a secure state mental health facility. During the victim impact statements, the families were given a final chance to speak. They described the vibrant lives he had extinguished, lives that would never be restored by a clinical diagnosis or a court order. Today, the garage bar on Kokomo Lane is gone, replaced by a heavy silence that no warm tropical breeze can ever truly fill. The Harrouff case remains a grim, indelible milestone in forensic history, a chilling reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not born of synthetic chemicals or urban legends, but of the raw, untethered human mind. Austin now exists in a state-run shadow, while the community of Jupiter carries a permanent scar. In the end, we are left to wonder how thin the line truly is between the golden life we build and the sudden darkness we can never fully predict. Some secrets remain buried in the Florida soil, proving that madness has no logic, and peace is only as strong as the mind that guards it. If you are finished watching, you're a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give it a like. See you in the next video.